Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1059B, and today's date is August 26, 2016, and the title of the episode is, The August Event Continues. The creation of a security zone is now complete. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. Just as a reminder, tonight at 8 p.m., I'll be live with V the Guerrilla Economist. All you need to do is go to YouTube, type in Rogue Money, and you can listen to the live stream. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we've talked about Obamacare quite often, and Obamacare is completely collapsing. And I have these two maps on the X22Report.com site showing you the difference between what it looked like in 2016 and how many carriers there were in the United States, and how it is now in 2017, where it has gotten much, much worse, where each state has less and less carriers. But Obama is still out there convincing the public with this huge illusion that Obamacare is doing very well. And for those that don't know, Obamacare is the Affordable Care Act. And we can see that it is getting worse and worse as time goes on. It is not a benefit to the people. But again, the U.S. government loves to try to convince everyone that everything is fine when it is not. Just like they try to convince you that it is a benefit to you when it really is a benefit to them. So we can see right now Obamacare, not good for the people. We see the United States government central bankers, they are continually trying to chip away at our amendments. The American Bar Association, they want to limit lawyers' expression of viewpoints that it disapproves of. On August 8, 2016, the American Bar Association approved Resolution 109, which curtails freedom of speech. The approved resolution amended its Model Rule of Professional Conduct 8.4. It prohibits the following: conduct that the lawyer knows or reasonably should know is harassment or discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, socioeconomic status, in conduct related to the practice of law. Resolution 109 is so broad it could mean anything. A kind of speech code that restricts perfectly acceptable speech. Coming from Ela Shapiro from the Cato Institute, anything you say might offend someone and therefore can be punished for it. So what we see happening here is they are controlling the freedom of speech. Just like universities set up certain areas where you can speak freely. Universities saying that is unacceptable speech. Now, the freedom of speech is to speak freely about anything, because you have to remember, what offends one group might not offend another group. So how do you decide? And when you look at our founding fathers, and when they talked about freedom of speech, it wasn't about permitting certain words. It wasn't about saying you can say this to one group and you can't say this to another group, because each group is different. It's about you saying whatever you want. Now, the other person might object to it. Yes, they might feel bad. They might get angry. But you still have the right and the freedom to say it. Yes, you might get in trouble for saying it. But that's not the point. The point is what the U.S. government, what the central bankers, what everyone is trying to do is they're trying to tell you what is okay, what you can say, what are the correct words you can use. And that is not freedom of speech. That is permitted speech. And we can see that they're still trying to push this. And again, you have the freedom to say whatever you want. The outcome of what you say is something different completely. Now, out in Boston, something very odd that we've seen before, like in Miami and other states, we've seen these helicopters, these black helicopters, flying low over the downtown area, and they've seen this in Boston for several nights this week. The Department of Defense is very quiet about this, and it looks like they're running maybe some type of exercise. in conjunction with the Boston Police Department. Now, both agencies have refused to discuss the drill at all, and we can see they're practicing for something. Now, we've seen this before. Actually, in Miami at one time, they used live rounds during a drill. They were blanks, but they were actually shooting from the helicopters, flying very low in between the buildings. At that time, police didn't even know what was going on. They had no clue what was going on. And we can see this type of training is continually going on in many of the different cities. Out in Ukraine, we see Russia is out there. The Russian envoy to the Trilateral Contact Group, he's saying we need a full and permanent ceasefire in Donbass by September 1st. The situation is getting worse and worse day by day. And he calls on Ukraine, Russia, the southeastern people, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to get together to stop this before this gets out of hand. Well, we know Kiev, the United States government, the central bankers, they want this to get out of hand. They want this to turn into a full war. They want a war in Ukraine. They want a war in Syria. They want a war in the Pacific. They want war, period. This is what they've been trying to get to. Now, we talked about these DC leaks, and we found out that Soros and Obama and the UN, they were all behind the refugee crisis. And there's over 2,500 documents from this. And from this, we're learning that George Soros was planning to destabilize Russia and overthrow Putin. And of course, Russia figured this out, got rid of all of the Soros-backed NGOs, threw them out of the country. And Soros does this in many different ways. And the documents detailed how he does this. He uses political prisoners, media censorship, surveillance, LGBT, push against propaganda laws. He uses women's rights, disability rights, whatever they can use to push the idea to get people all riled up. This is what he has done. We also know that he is behind the Black Lives Matter, trying to gin up a race war here in the United States. Because as we know, the government does not want the people to focus in on them, on the central bank. They want the people fighting each other. And this is what they do in other countries to confuse the situation, to have people join in on this movement to try to overthrow a government. We've seen it happen in Ukraine. We saw it happen in the Middle East. We're seeing it happening in Brazil, Venezuela. These are the methods they use every single time when they want to overthrow a government. But it's very difficult to do in Russia, and it has failed. Now, a couple days ago, we talked about John Kerry and how he was flying out to Saudi Arabia to hammer out a peace deal for Yemen. And we knew right there and then that he wasn't there to promote peace. Because every time the United States government central bankers are losing in a certain area, they try to push peace, but it really isn't peace. I mean, look at Syria. All of a sudden, Russia stepped in. They were hitting the Islamic State very hard, hitting their other terrorist groups very hard, and then all of a sudden the United States wanted peace, but it never really was peace. It was about ceasefiring, about rearming. Out in Yemen, Secretary of State John Kerry announced a deal with Saudi Arabia on a new peace initiative. So what is this new peace initiative? Well, it's very simple. We've heard it before. This is nothing new. All he wants, all the United States government central bankers want, is the Houthis in Yemen to lay down their weapons and surrender. This is the same peace deal they had in Ukraine with Poroshenko. He said to the southeastern people, lay down your weapons, surrender. This is our peace terms. We had the same thing in Syria. We had the same thing throughout the Middle East. And here we are in Yemen. They're using the same exact strategy. Now, out in Libya, we see the UN-backed government, which the people don't want in their country. The parliament already said, we don't want you as a government. We didn't elect you, so you are not the government. But the Libyan UN-backed government, they want the U.S. to come in to bomb Libya even more. They want the United States to step up its military assistance, which means the coalition forces are now going to be heading off into Libya. They planned this for a very long time. We've been tracking it, watching it, and here it is. We see that Iraq's prime minister and Syrian foreign minister, they are in talks now to secure the borders between Syria and Iraq since they have gotten rid of the Islamic State. They will close them down right now, which is going to be a problem for the United States government, central bankers, and all their terrorist groups. They like the borders open so they can move them in and out. And we can see the situation is getting worse and worse as we move throughout this August. We see Kerry is with Lavrov now in Geneva. They're talking about Ukraine. They're talking about Syria. And the reason why they're talking about this is because things are really starting to heat up. Of course, here in the corporate media in the United States, they're like, oh, well, John Kerry is out there, and we're trying to coordinate our militaries together to go after the terrorists. Well, that's not what they're trying to do. They're stalling. We see the Turkish army, they're out there saying that they're going to be staying in Syria until the terrorists are wiped out. Well, what they're really saying is we're going to stay in there to defend our safety zone, our exclusion zone, our buffer zone that we're creating. And we will stay there until we have this completed and secured. And actually, they're never going to leave. And they're saying that, listen, we've come in with 400 Turkish military, but we can bring that number up to 15,000. So we've been talking about a buffer zone for a very long time. And I know the United States was out there saying, no, we don't want a buffer zone. We don't agree with Turkey. Well, of course they did. They planned this 2 years ago. They knew exactly what they were going to do. It was all part of the think tank's plan, was to create these zones. Well, guess what, everyone? It has happened. Turkish authorities have announced the creation of a security zone in the area of the Syrian city of Jarablus. So they've created a security zone in this area. And they're saying that this is going to be an area where the refugees are going to be, which is what they wanted in the beginning. Plus, they're going to use it for their operations. So we can see already what they wanted to do is exactly what they have done. And the United States gave them air cover. They knew exactly what they were going to do. And it was time to create this. So it looks like Erdogan is playing both sides now. He's playing with the Russian side. He's playing with the U.S. side. Now, of course, Erdogan is out there saying we have to do this to secure the borders. We need this buffer zone. We need to do all of this. We need to carve out this area. There's a no-fly, no bombing zone area. And what we see happening right now is the United States government central bankers, they are making their move. They are making their move to go after Assad. They're going to use this area where they have their two bases. The French have an air base in this area. The safety zone will get larger and larger. And they will say, eventually, this is no longer part of Syria. And we can see right now they're using the UN report that Syria has used chemical weapons. And we can see right now that Russia is looking at this and they want to review the entire report because we know that in the past that these reports really didn't tell the whole story. A lot of information was missing. And Russia understands this. And they're saying we need to be a part of the investigation. And normally, once this happens, things start to really fall apart. Former CIA officer Larry Johnson also confirms the propaganda from the West, where they tried to blame everything on Syria with the chemical weapons attack. And he's saying that the U.S., Israel, the coalition forces, they monitor this area on a daily basis. And what he's saying is, in other words, the use of chemical weapons by Syria would first require advanced preparation by a Syrian military chemical unit. And U.S. and Israel intelligence, they would have detected such activity, and they never have. And now we're getting reports that the Turkish forces, on August 25th, yesterday, they used chemical weapons as they were bombing the villages. And they're saying that people are sick, and they're showing that, yes, they have been using chemical weapons. Now, of course, Russia is out there saying, the United States needs to calm down because, of course, the United States is using this propaganda, and they're out there saying we need some swift action right now. And Russia's saying, well, you need to look at what you've been doing before you start pointing fingers, because your moderate rebels were cutting off people's heads. Your moderate rebels were torturing people. Your moderate rebels, they were using chemical weapons. Your moderate rebels were doing horrific acts. Turkey has used chemical weapons. So before we go crazy here pointing fingers, let's look at the facts. Let's look at what's really going on here, and let's see if this UN report really holds up. And let me just tell you, that's where it's going to fall apart. It always does. And it always points back to the moderate rebels and the terrorist groups, which they're one and the same. But people like to hear the word moderate rebels because it makes it seem better. But no, they're really terrorists. They're all terrorists. It's Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. No matter how many times they change their name, they're the same terrorist group. And we can see this August event is really starting to heat up, and it looks like the United States government central bankers, they are making their push for going after Assad, dividing up Syria, and we're going to have to watch this situation very closely because we can see they're going to stick to their goal, and they're not going to give up until they reach it. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.